The central question is, did the guy who did a coup, can he be immune from that? Like, can you do a coup and be immune? And Ludig's point, and I think this is how I felt listening to it, was just, why isn't anybody answering that question?
Hello, everyone. This is JVL here with my best friend, Sarah Longwell, publisher of the Bulwark. So let's just do Supreme Court stuff.
Okay.
We had two fantastic shows about this last night at the Bulwark. One was Mona Charon sitting down for a conversation with our, I guess, two, very, very close friends of the Bulwark, Greg Nunziata and Kim Whaley. And then you sat down with George Conway and did your own thing on it. And I would say we got all three perspectives. We got George's, hey, settle down, everything's going to be okay. We got Greg Nunziata's, I don't know, it could go either way. And then we got Kim Whaley saying, boy, this doesn't look good. So I am curious as to where you are and what your thoughts are on gestures broadly, all of this.
I mean, I have to listen to other people on this stuff. Like, the whole reason I started this podcast with George Conway is because I was
that's
like,
the problem. We had three other people and they all said different things.
I know. And so after listening to them, the George thing was interesting. So I was on TV with David Frum this morning, and he had a pretty similar take to what George did, which was, look, the guy who was taking Trump's position, right? The total immunity, that the judges are like, that's stupid. And like that nobody's going to take the idea of blanket immunity seriously, because you set up these preposterous hypothetical, not preposterous, you set up these hypotheticals that are like, okay, so Biden could, in his official capacity, order the military to kill his political rival Donald Trump because he is corrupt, and that's an official act, and therefore he'd be immune from that. And, the lawyer's kind of like, well, it would depend on the specifics, but yeah, in your hypothetical, sure, you'd be able to do that, right? And so George's point, and I think David's point this morning, were sort of both like, there was no need for the lawyers to sit after that and like spend a long time on this, because nobody's going to give blanket immunity. And then the part where they were questioning the state's attorney, right, which is what I think has people really freaked out, is it just like looked like they were taking very seriously the extent to which they spent time prodding the hypotheticals for a future president. Was kind of like, oh my God, like they're just not being laughed out of court. They are taking this seriously. They are trying to figure out all of the different ways that it could apply. George's point and David's was like, this is an intellectual exercise that comes from the need to, if you're going to rule on this, it's going to have implications forever. And you have to be like, George was saying this thing on the show about how hard cases make bad laws, because
that is a truism.
You have to take these incredibly difficult cases and try to turn them into something that can apply to all other hypothetical cases in the future, right? So it sounds like what they will do, or this is what George thought they would do, and what David seemed to think they would do, is that like on the narrow question of whether, and this was Judge Ludig also, who's a friend, was saying, and I would say my reaction was the closest to his, where I listened to it and I was like, why are they entertaining this? Like, why aren't they just saying, well, this is the dumbest thing I've ever heard? But also, I don't listen to a lot of Supreme Court cases. I mean, by the time it's there, they're gonna take it seriously. Like, they're gonna consider all the angles. And the other thing George said is that this guy who was arguing for the state, Deneen, is that his name?
Not Patrick Deneen, but it begins I'll look it up while you talk.
Okay, thanks. That he is really, really well respected and really good. And so a lot of what the Supreme Court justices were doing is like using him to kick the tires, right? Being like, okay, but how would you answer this? And how would you answer this? But to Ludig's point, and this is like the central question is, did the guy who did a coup, can he be immune from that? Like, can you do a coup and be immune? And Ludig's point, and I think this is how I felt listening to it, was just, why isn't anybody answering that question? It seems like the most germane question. Seems like an obvious one and feels like, we should discuss it. Instead, there's a lot about like, could George Bush be prosecuted? Could Obama be prosecuted for the drones? It was like Trump was like one of my lawyer friend I have.
Michael Dreeben,
thank you. A lawyer friend that I have was like, Trump's like a ghost at this trial. Like, it's weird because it is about him. He is the one testing our institutions and forcing us to consider things that we've never had to consider because he's a bad person and because he's done so much criminal activity. We now are like forced to debate these things. But just the Trump was not at the center of it. Like, we weren't talking about Trump. And so I think everybody sort of came away with like, okay, this is preposterous. And the other thing that I had the immediate thought when Trump's lawyer was arguing is like the quality of shamelessness that has always pervaded Trump and his people. Like, you are going to stand up in front of the Supreme Court and be like, yeah, so if he did a coup, he gets to be immune from the coup. And Kagan is like, well, that sounds idiotic. And it's like, I'm just here to make the case.
But then Sam Alito's position was, but if you prosecute somebody for trying a coup, then aren't you incentivizing people to do more coups? It's like, what the fuck are you talking about?
The Alito thing was the worst piece.
We're not prosecuting people who've done coups before, and now we got an attempted coup. He's like, but wouldn't you get more coups?
Well,
if
that's
you tried
not
to hold
that's
people accountable for them?
What he was saying was, if any president or every president thought that once they left office, they might get prosecuted for things they did while in office, wouldn't that encourage them to try to stay in office by refusing to leave
by
office?
Trying to stop a coup, you're actually causing more coups.
Yeah.
See, it's your fault, libs. Yeah. You resistance never Trump TDS people.
Yeah, he's got MAGA brain rot, Alito. Like, he is that was the real low point. And I think it is the thing that made people go, oh my God, Kavanaugh, Alito, Gorsuch, like they all seem like Thomas, they all seem like they could go for this.
100%.
And not full immunity. I don't think this was
full immunity.
Not full immunity, but that. But here's the thing: like, and the private action versus public action, right? So there was much made of this, and one of the things that came through pretty loud and clear was the difference between public action and private action. Even Trump's attempted coup, much of that could be considered private action, not public action.
All of it.
So, like, here's the thing, though. There was this good Rolling Stone piece that is basically how I'm thinking about this, because I'm just now all I can do is aggregate what we hear smarter people who are lawyers say to us. But the Rolling Stone thing sounded right to me, which is that Trump's team is already celebrating what they consider to be a victory in having delayed this particular trial.
Yeah. Past
the point at which there could be a verdict, right? Like there could conceivably still, they could get the trial kicked off. They could be mid-trial in like September and October, but not a verdict rendered. And so for them,
aided and abetted that.
Well,
the Supreme Court aided and abetted that. They could have chosen. They had discretion. Every point where given discretion, they've chosen the side of delay. Yeah,
you know who else had discretion? The Republican senators who failed to impeach him, and also the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice had to be dragged kicking and screaming to do this by the January 6th committee. And so, like, when you think about the fact that Trump did the coup in 2021, the very beginning, it was January 6th. It's a date that lives in infamy. January 6th, 2021, and now here we are getting to the middle of 2024. Like, to say that the courts are the only ones responsible for the timeline, like, they kind of get the hot potato right here at the end. But, like, there have been a lot of people who have refused at every juncture to be the mechanism for accountability.
I want to defend Merrick Garland slightly on this. I would agree with the Republican senators who deserve blame. Garland's delay, in a world in which people genuinely believed that Trump might not run again, then Garland's delay could be read as prudence.
Sure.
It could be, this is a bleeding wound in America. Maybe the guy will just go away and we can move on and start rebuilding.
Sure.
Now, I don't know that that's the right answer, but that is not a crazy answer. And it only looks really bad in retrospect now, knowing that he ran. And of course, I mean, I've been saying again that he was going to run from the beginning. But you could see in a world in which Merrick Garland does move judiciously on this and then Trump goes, then people will be blaming Merrick Garland for Trump running.
So
they would be saying, well, Trump,
I agree with that.
You know what? You Dems made him do it because he was just going to go away. But Merrick Garland, the out of control prosecutor, went after him, and that made him have to run.
I say this not to impugn Merrick Garland. I say this as a defense slightly of the fact that this people are super mad at the Supreme Court right now. And on one hand, I sort of can understand why. On the other hand, I feel like asking them to make a decision, not just about like, and I wish that they had just ruled, right? They just like upheld the lower court that was like, obviously you don't have blanket immunity. But you can sort of see why, even if you have a bad person as president, right? Donald Trump, let's say he's president again. Donald Trump, what are the circumstances under which he could prosecute Joe Biden? Right? And so like they're having to consider now this big question that our democracy, this is where Trump tests all our institutions beyond places they've ever had to be tested. And so like, they now think like, how do we put these guardrails in place? And that is too big a question to decide right, like in days.
I have a darker view.
Sure. And maybe they're just trying to help him delay. Go ahead.
No. In the same way that like the small government conservatives who are interested in personal responsibility and robust foreign policy, it turns out they didn't care about any of that stuff. Those were all just useful cudgels to beat up on whoever the outgroups were at that point. I think it's possible the textualists and originalists were the same. Because the conservative judicial temperament used to be, got to read the plain text of the Constitution, and we got to rule as narrowly as possible. We cannot legislate from the bench. We got to, in every case, whenever given the opportunity to rule broadly, the conservative judicial philosophy is to rule as narrowly as possible. And this court appears to be choosing to want to rule broadly. This court seems to want to say, as Gorsuch said, what we do now will be considered for the ages. But that is what we used to call a liberal activist view of judicial power. And the conservative view would be, is always like kick the can down the road, right? Hey,
I do think they kicked the can down the road, though. I mean, that's just my understanding of what George was saying and David was saying is actually this is a kick down. What they do, they think that the Supreme Court will rule narrowly that Trump can be, is not immune under these circumstances. Like, that's what they think. They think that you will get the right verdict on Trump specifically. They do. And then they think it will get kicked back to these lower courts now to have to wrestle with these broader questions, and that we will be considering these broader. We will be considering these broader questions for like a long time.
But even that's a middle ground. Like there was a narrower way to do this, which
it was just to not rule on it. It was just to uphold the lower court, right?
And they do seem to. I mean, again, the very fact that they kept saying, "I don't want to talk about this case. I want to talk about all these other hypotheticals." Well, that's the activist impulse.
Yeah,
it says right there in the Constitution. There's that line in the Constitution about how, the president, even having been impeached, the president can still be subject to criminal laws.
Sure.
It said so, and they didn't seem to care at all about that. And so
you do have a lot of people. It
makes me very concerned that our conservative justices are now like activist libs wanting to legislate their views of executive power.
Well, that's it. It's about executive power, right? So,
Right.
so
and
you've got
they
a bunch
seem
of
to want more executive power
Yes.
rather than less.
So this
Which
goes
again
back
is
to
not
this, like,
conservative. Hey, Sarah, there's more show.
oh, there is.
Yeah.
Are we still talking? We have more
Yeah,
talking.
we're still talking. The talking goes on, but that's only for the the people who are inside the Velvet Rope, the Bulwark Plus members.
Oh, they got to subscribe.
Yeah, tell them to subscribe. Tell the
You should
people,
subscribe,
Sarah.
guys. Why wouldn't you subscribe? You get all kinds of things. You get some extra me and JVL. You get some extra me and George Conway. You get JVL's Triad. It's one of the best things the Bulwark offers. I read it at least once or twice a week.
Yes, go and subscribe. We'd love to have you.